Around 67 years before the game's events, a catastrophic event reshaped the world of Lumiere. This event, known as the Fracture, tore the land apart, separating Lumiere from the mainland while the rest of the continent drifted away across the sea. In this video, we'll be diving into the aftermath of that moment, tracing the expeditions that followed and uncovering the deep lore behind them. And we'll be doing it through one primary lens, the expedition journals. So a quick warning, this video will include major endgame spoilers. So after the fracture, the land split in two. The section that stayed became modern-day Lumiere, the hub of every expedition, while the fragment that drifted away with the continent was later known as Old Lumiere. The chaos that followed this event marked the beginning of all expeditions. The earliest and least clearly defined of them was Expedition Zero. Its purpose was simple but urgent: find and rescue survivors stranded on the other side. We know from a recovered audio log that many people did survive in Old Lumiere, but reaching them was a challenge. The split had created a sea between the two lands, cutting off any hope for immediate aid.
I guess I'm living out of pure stubbornness at this point. Survival isn't really survival anymore.
Their only hope was Expedition Zero, led by Renoir and joined by his son Verso, possibly his daughter Clair, and a handful of volunteers whose stories surfaced through scattered journals. But to truly understand why Renoir and his family took part in this mission, we need to step outside the canvas and return to the real world. Everything in the game takes place inside a painting, while a separate real world exists outside of it. This painted realm is the creation of the Axons, a family of gifted painters capable of bringing their work to life. It's implied that this power comes from leaving behind a fragment of their soul within each painting they create. The canvas at the heart of the game belonged to Verso, who created it before his death, sacrificing himself to save his sister Alicia from a fire. His mother, Aline, whom we come to know as the Paintress, was then consumed by grief. She entered Verso's canvas and began reshaping it, painting the city of Lumiere, populating it with people and recreating her family as painted duplicates. It became a space of comfort for her, built from memory and longing. Fearing that Aline had become trapped inside this painted world and that too much time within it could be fatal, her husband Renoir and daughter Clair entered the canvas as well, not to confront her, but to bring her back. From this point on, we'll use the word painted to distinguish the real-world Axons from their in-canvas counterparts. Inside the canvas, the painted Axons had no awareness of their true nature. Believing themselves to be real, they joined Expedition Zero in the wake of the fracture to search for Aline. But as the expedition neared the monolith, they were confronted by the real Clair, who revealed the truth about their existence. They weren't actual people, but recreations and fragments brought to life by paint and memory. She first tried to recruit her painted family members, but when they didn't comply, Clair attempted to erase them, convinced it was the only way to prevent them from disrupting their plan to take Aline out of the canvas. But her efforts failed. Unbeknownst to her, the Paintress had granted them both immortality, ensuring that not even Clair could undo them. Now fully aware of their origins and Aline's intentions, the two survivors returned to Lumiere. Clair, however, had already set another plan into motion. She repainted her own duplicate and gave her a new purpose, which was to create creatures called Nevrons, deadly beings designed to trap chroma from their victims. Their main purpose was to deny chroma from Aline's creations from returning to her, starving her of the energy that sustained her, weakening her over time and eventually forcing her out of the canvas. Clair didn't stop there. Using her resemblance to her painted self, she emotionally manipulated Simon, a fellow member of Expedition Zero and her painted self's alleged partner.
Simon.
You know him?
He's an old friend of mine. We joined Expedition Zero together. He disappeared and I thought... Looks like you met Clair.
According to his journal, she transformed him into a weapon against the Paintress, infusing him with so much chroma that even the Axons, beings made entirely of it, could be destroyed. Then she sent him toward the monolith, hoping he would finish what she had begun. But things did not happen as she had envisioned. Aline was able to convince Simon that she was only trying to save them all and that the real threat was Renoir, sealed beneath the monolith and the one responsible for triggering the gommage. In the final entry of Simon's journal, he writes about descending into the depths of the monolith. But even then, he's struggling, barely able to hold on to his own mind as Renoir's influence begins to take over. Then comes Julie's journal, which reveals just how widespread Expedition Zero really was. It wasn't a single unit, but possibly a large initiative with multiple groups scattered across the continent. She writes that Painted Renoir and Verso made it back, either to her group or to Lumiere itself. The timeline's murky, but the implication is that these teams may have traveled at different times, possibly due to a lack of resources. Julie's journal also reveals that Painted Renoir and Verso were trying to convince the others that the Paintress wasn't their enemy, but the solution to everything they were facing. This implies that the first gommage had already taken place, and that many survivors had come to believe the Paintress was trying to erase them. That belief would explain why Julie and her expedition were so hesitant to trust Painted Renoir and Verso. Further confirmation comes from one of Mael's nightmares, where the number 100 appears on the surface of the monolith, clearly marking the point where the gommage process must have started. The next part of the story unfolds through some of the most disturbing entries in the records. Sometime after Julie and Painted Verso reunited, he is torn in half and dies, but returns completely whole. His resurrection shocks the team and fear quickly sets in. Suspicion spreads. They imprison him and begin interrogating him, convinced that he and Painted Renoir are somehow working with the Paintress. But what follows is far worse. Painted Verso responds, unable to convince them of the truth, resorts to brutality, and kills them all. Verso and Julie shared a deep connection. Though the nature of their relationship was never clearly defined as romantic, their bond was undeniable, as shown through a series of journals. In his own writings, Verso reflects on the emotional weight of what he did. After Painted Renoir began to suspect that Clair had tampered with the minds of the others, Verso felt he had no choice. His only hope was that by siding with Aline, he might someday be given the chance to see Julie again, if Aline ever chose to repaint her. But by the time Expedition 33 arrives on the continent, it's clear that something inside him has changed. The hope that once guided him is gone, replaced by something far more conflicted. By that time, whatever he has become, it's no longer about belief. It's shaped by grief, guilt, and the echo of everything he's done. After a 15-year silence following the failure of Expedition Zero, the next major movement doesn't occur until Monolith Year 84. But why such a long pause? And what caused the expeditions to suddenly resume? To understand that, it's important to recognize that Expedition Zero was largely a disaster. Most of its members never returned, and the mission's primary goal, rescuing survivors, was ultimately unsuccessful. With no clear understanding of what they were up against, the people of Lumiere may have simply given up. At that time, the urgency to stop the Paintress didn't yet exist, especially since so few lived long enough to witness what would come beyond the age of 100. But when expeditions did return, their goals had clearly shifted. The very naming system changed, from a sequential count to chronological tracking, marking this one as Expedition 84, not Expedition 2. And their mission had changed as well. These weren't rescue teams anymore. They were searching for answers. What had happened to Expedition Zero? What lay beyond the dome? But before we dive into those questions, we need to ask, what exactly is the dome? According to Yasmin's journal, people in Lumiere had grown restless. Rumors and theories were spreading, trying to explain the strange phenomena surrounding the monolith. Her entry confirms the existence of the dome, a kind of protective barrier that surrounds Lumiere. While its exact purpose remains unclear, she hints that it might not be the sea keeping the Nevrons out. It might be the dome itself. After a 2-year break, in Monolith Year 81, another expedition was launched. But instead of clarity, they returned with only more questions, if they returned at all. Contrary to previous beliefs, they discovered that some Nevrons were not hostile at all. In fact, a few were even capable of communication. This revelation shattered the established understanding of the threat and should have forced Lumiere to reconsider everything. But that shift never happened. None of that information made it back. The expeditioners all perished. Then there's another gap, this time only 2 years. Whether no journals were recorded or expeditions halted again, we don't know. But the next available entry, dated Monolith Year 78, offers a possible explanation. This journal suggests that leadership in Lumiere had abandoned the idea of sanctioned expeditions entirely. The group behind this mission had to steal airships to begin their journey. They weren't searching for survivors, they were rebelling. Feeling trapped inside the dome, they chose to take matters into their own hands and reclaim their freedom. Unfortunately, their journey ended prematurely at the Stone Wave Cliffs, likely due to poor planning, inadequate resources, and a complete lack of support. They were unprepared for what awaited them beyond the dome. What followed was another 7-year silence. Whether caused by internal conflict within Lumiere or because no meaningful records were left behind, this period remains another blank space in the timeline. Then comes Monolith Year 70, a turning point. Charlotte and her team became the first since Expedition Zero to enter the monolith itself. They reached closer to the Paintress than anyone had in years, but were ultimately stopped by a Nevron too powerful to overcome. This raises an important question. The last known expedition had to steal resources to make their journey, so how was Charlotte's expedition even possible? Her journal provides the answer. It introduces a new motto embraced by the team, one that signals a shift in the expedition philosophy.
This is our gift for all the expeditions to come.
These missions weren't just about defeating the Paintress anymore. They had become about building a path forward, one expedition at a time. Charlotte's team laid grapple points inside the monolith, establishing a physical trail for future expeditions to follow. Around this time, Lumiere's population was bigger than during the events of the game, and according to Charlotte's writings, more people were volunteering to join expeditions. That scale is reflected in Expedition 69, where the team was divided into specialized groups. Some explored mountain ranges, others charted cave systems. A few weren't combatants at all. They were focused purely on support tasks, placing handholds, marking safe paths, building maps. Their mission wasn't survival, it was preparation. According to the expedition's log, many members were assigned to roles that required minimal physical exertion. There may be a reason for this. If most participants were just 1 year away from their erasure, it's likely they were around 68 years old. This points to an older demographic for Expedition 69, one that prioritized logistical support over direct combat, making strategic use of their remaining time. Expeditions had now become consistent. From Monolith Year 68 to 65, a new team arrived each year. Though none survived or made significant progress towards stopping the Gomaj, each left behind valuable fragments of knowledge, small windows into the ever-changing world beyond the dome. In Monolith Year 68, a devastating storm threw the expedition off course. Still, the team pressed on, managing to take down several Nevrons before encountering one far beyond their ability to defeat. Their journal, however, offers an unexpected insight.
We lost the moon and the stars, condemned to a never-ending darkness of punishing rain and raging clouds.
This line suggests that expeditions were navigating by celestial patterns, relying on the stars and moon to find their way, which hints at a level of astronomical planning rarely mentioned anywhere else in the game. Expedition 67, by contrast, was known for its overwhelming firepower.
We're out of explosives, but we've made enough holes in this place to reach that giant woman in the center. But something weird's going on.
They reached one of the Axons known as Siren, and none survived the encounter. Her power, described in the journal as empathic distress, overwhelmed the team by projecting visions of their lost loved ones, rendering them emotionally vulnerable and easy prey. When we finally face Siren in Expedition 33, we see this ability firsthand, how her melody intoxicates the mind and twists grief into illusion. But unlike Expedition 67, Expedition 39 encountered a different Axon, the Visages. Their experience was no less intense. Instead of a melody, they were tormented by shifting masks, each one silently watching, each one reflecting something they couldn't explain. The team's failure to understand or navigate the emotional weight behind these apparitions ultimately led to their collapse. Where Siren drowned her victims in sorrow, the Visages unsettled theirs through silence, ambiguity, and fear. Expedition 66 met a stranger fate. Their journey led them to Esquia's nest, where things took an unexpectedly tragic turn. Esquia, in what seemed to be an act of kindness, unknowingly handed them poisonous mushrooms. They died shortly after. Unlike most others, their expedition didn't end in battle. It ended in quiet tragedy, a reminder that not all failures were dramatic, and not all deaths were heroic. Expedition 65, however, had a more peaceful end. They encountered the Grandis and were welcomed. Though they knew the Gomaj would soon erase them, their final days were spent in calm reflection. Their journal speaks with a tone of quiet acceptance. Not everyone would survive, but perhaps the Grandis would. That thought gave them a fragile final sense of hope. Up until this point, there had been no direct interference from Painted Renoir or Painted Verso. Naturally, that raised the question, what have they been doing all this time? Expedition 64 finally gives us an answer. As with other large-scale expeditions, this group was divided into smaller teams. To stay in contact, they relied on communication channels established during earlier missions. But the journal from this expedition hints at something more sinister: sabotage. It specifically notes a failure in the communication system. These teams were using post-fracture lines, likely first put in place by Expedition Zero. And who are the only known survivors from that mission? Painted Renoir and Painted Verso. There is a strong implication that Painted Renoir may have sabotaged Expedition 64, possibly eliminating them group by group. Was his thirst for blood driven by paranoia, by the fear that Clair had already infiltrated the expedition? His betrayal, though brutal, had a twisted logic. By erasing the expeditioners himself, he could prevent their chroma from being trapped by the Nevrons and instead allow it to return freely to Aline. But what's worth examining is how these expeditions managed to maintain walkie-talkie communication as early as year 100. It begs the question, how technologically advanced was Lumiere back then? In the game's prologue, there are no visible signs of vehicles or aircraft, and yet these machines appear regularly in the journals. Airships are mentioned in year 78. Then again in year 63 when one group brought cars with them.
Whatever this massive thing is. So much for Gerald's vaunted reinforced front plates. I can't believe we have to abandon the cars already.
Unfortunately, a rough landing left most of the team injured and the vehicles were quickly rendered useless. Over the years, with fewer skilled engineers, a shrinking population, and nearly all remaining resources funneled into expeditions, Lumiere's technology stagnated. Efforts became increasingly fragmented, patchwork solutions stitched together from fading knowledge. That all changed with Expedition 60. They abandoned technology entirely. No vehicles, no equipment, not even standard-issue uniforms. They believed the human body, disciplined, sharpened, and pushed to its peak, was more reliable than any machine. They trained relentlessly and swam across to the continent, and fought their way into the monolith. And they succeeded. They reached the Paintress. They learned the truth. No other expedition had made it that far. Expedition 70 came close, and Expedition 0 was stopped by Clair before entering the monolith. But Expedition 60 marched forward and confronted Renoir beneath it. One of them even attempted to return to Lumiere carrying the knowledge they had gained. But even with perfect form and unmatched will, he couldn't outrun the Gommage. What follows the triumph of Expedition 60 is nothing short of a hysterical tragedy. Expedition 59 took the apex predator philosophy a little too far. According to their journal, they hunted, cooked, and ate an actual Nevron. Predictably, everyone got sick. To make matters worse, they later prepared a broth using unidentified mushrooms, the same kind that had already doomed Expedition 66. Their fate was sealed not by combat or catastrophe, but by recklessness. Now, back to more serious matters. Expedition 58. Their journal includes some of the most important revelations so far.
The behemoth is such a marvel. It has a small city on its back that I really want to explore.
The behemoth mentioned here is actually an Axon known as the Hauler, a massive creature carrying what appears to be a piece of Lumiere on its back. The landscape around it is described as a battlefield scattered across a sea of blades. This imagery closely matches a secret boss encounter during Expedition 33, none other than Simon from Expedition 0. It strongly suggests that the Hauler was taken down by Simon after he was infused with chroma by Clair. A similar account appears in a journal from Expedition 61 written by Margot, a journal we previously skipped. She describes another Axon located in a region called the Reacher. Her notes paint the creature as oddly different, out of place, even sympathetic. She writes that she can't help but wish for it to reach the sky. This cryptic feeling only starts to make sense when we dive deeper into the symbolic nature of the Axons. To do that, you'll need to access a hidden region beneath the monolith, Renoir's Drafts, the very place where the real Renoir was once imprisoned. There, twisted duplicates of various Axons can be found, each one created in the image of Renoir's family members. The Hauler is revealed to represent Clair, the daughter who bore the burdens of her entire family without complaint. Serene, or Siren, is a reflection of Aline, her presence steeped in overwhelming grief and beauty that drowns the senses. The Reacher, mentioned in Margot's journal, represents Alicia, a figure who never quite fit the family mold and always underestimated her potential. And the Mask Keeper mirrors Verso, whose hidden love for music was buried beneath a life he never truly chose. Through their journal, Expedition 58 adds another layer of complexity to what really happened beneath the monolith. Their mission was to build a weapon powerful enough to break through the barrier protecting the Paintress. But this raises an important question. Did that barrier even exist during Expedition 70 or 60? Both groups reached the monolith, and neither built nor even mentioned a weapon designed to breach it. In fact, during one of Verso's conversations with Mael, he claims that Clair stopped Expedition 0, the very first expedition, at that same barrier. But this directly contradicts what we find in the game. The final expedition flag from 0 is located just before the Paintress's boss arena, well beyond where the barrier is supposed to be. The most plausible explanation is that Simon, infused with chroma by Clair, was the one who broke the barrier and planted the flag before confronting the Paintress. The barrier may have remained down until Expedition 60's bold attempt to take down Renoir. Afterward, it was likely restored, possibly as a reaction to how close they came to success. Delphine, the commander of Expedition 58, documented that Axons have hearts made of pure chroma, powerful enough to fuel such a weapon. She even referenced the Curator and his ability to forge it, suggesting he was the one supplying them with this knowledge. As revealed later, the Curator is actually the real Renoir, projecting a weakened imitation of himself from beneath the monolith. Clair even confirms during Act 3 that it was Renoir who raised the barrier to begin with. So why did he want it destroyed all of a sudden? One possibility is that Renoir needed the chroma he had spent creating the Axons. If the barrier stood in his way, then taking it down might have been his way of reclaiming that power. With Aline growing weaker over the decades, he may have seen an opportunity to break free from his imprisonment. This also casts Verso in a much darker light. He didn't just lead Expedition 58 to failure, he led them astray. He never revealed the truth about himself or his father, and before the expedition could get close to completing the weapon, Painted Renoir slaughtered every last member. Journal 57 captures the crushing despair of a commander leading her squad into a war she already knows is lost. Her final reflections aren't just about failure, they center on regret, especially for the immense resources spent on building massive siege engines that proved both short-lived and ineffective. Her tone isn't hopeless exactly, it's weary. The strategies had been chosen, the machines built, and by the time their limitations were clear, it was far too late to change course. Even if the siege engines had performed perfectly, nothing could have prepared the expeditioners for a threat far more terrifying than any Nevron. The people of Lumiere had no idea that Painted Renoir, one of their own, had turned against them. By Monolith Year 56, the journal reveals something even more disturbing. One entry reads,
They just killed her, like she was a worthless Nevron.
The use of "they" implies that Renoir wasn't acting alone. Either multiple members of the Painted Descent family had joined in what had become a ritualistic slaughter of expeditioners, or perhaps they were simply caught in the chaos of Renoir's unrelenting spree. As previously discussed, the motivation is simple. When Nevrons kill, the chroma is trapped. But if the Descent family intervenes and finishes off the expeditioners before the Nevrons, the chroma can instead be channeled into sustaining the Paintress's fading power. After surviving one of these terrifying assaults, the remaining expeditioners of 56 set a desperate trap. They managed to capture one of the Painted family, almost certainly Painted Alicia, as the journal notes she never speaks. But the entry ends abruptly before revealing what happened next. One thing, however, is made clear. None of them returned. Yet even in the face of such failures, Lumiere remained resilient. In Expedition 55, we begin to see signs of experimentation and adaptation. Among their innovations is an early version of a now familiar technology, Pictos. Unlike in Expedition 33's timeline, where Pictos are refined and used for tactical or elemental purposes, these early versions are paired with music. It's an ambitious idea, but ultimately ineffective. The journal suggests the Nevrons remain unaffected, most likely because they lack the capacity to hear in the first place. The experiment fails, but it marks a critical turning point. Lumiere was still trying. Journal 54 offers another insight into Lumiere's social condition under the Gommage. Constantine, the journal's author, believes a rigid status quo has taken shape, one that favors those furthest from their Gommage and marginalizes those closer to it. The implication is that the younger population benefits from most decisions, while the older ones are treated as expendable. And anyone who questions this hierarchy or the council's authority is punished by being forced to join the expeditions. It's exile disguised as civic duty. And being sent on an expedition really was a death sentence. Out of the hundreds, possibly thousands who embarked, only 2 are known to have survived. Yet death wasn't always the worst outcome. Journal 53 reveals a moment where a comrade falls into a coma from critical injuries. With limited time and no way to save her, the rest of the team is forced to make a decision. They chose to put her to rest, not because they want to, but because they must, as waiting any longer could doom them all. This doesn't mean the expeditioners were cold. Expedition 51's journal offers one of the most moving insights into their bond.
Life is not easy. Life was never easy. But we have each other, and that makes all the difference.
The bond between team members was considered stronger than blood or love, because in these life-or-death situations, survival depended on complete mutual trust and unity, as they were the only ones they could rely on. Breaking context for a moment because Journal 53 mentions something unexpected. Animals. It's a small detail, but one that stands out sharply because animals are never seen anywhere else in the game. I can only think of a few possible explanations. The first is historical. Perhaps animals once existed in Lumiere before the Paintress initiated the gommage and were wiped out in the process. The second is interpretive. Maybe the expeditioners were referring to Nevrons as animals, though that feels like an odd and imprecise label. And the third? That it's a writing oversight. A meta-commentary perhaps, since the game itself portrays writers as villainous figures outside the canvas. Though 51's journal emphasized unity, not all shared that value. Expedition 48's journal reveals a complete breakdown in leadership after the commander led a group of members to their deaths. A mutiny broke out. Some survivors took matters into their own hands, removing the commander from his position. They believed he had no regard for their lives and had acted recklessly. Whether or not they were right, the incident highlights how fragile morale could be during these long, brutal campaigns. Some expeditions gave up altogether. Expedition 38's final entry tells of 2 remaining members who, after burying their friend near a lake, chose to abandon the mission and live out their remaining days in peace, even if that meant facing death at the hands of Nevrons. And if you thought Expedition 60's philosophy was extreme, Expedition 50 pushes absurdity even further. They built a massive wheel, yes, an actual wheel, and tried to use it as a mode of transportation. The idea alone sounds ridiculous, but the fact that they went through with it suggests one of 2 things. Either they knew something we didn't, or they had absolutely no idea what they were doing. Unsurprisingly, the plan didn't work. The wheel got stuck between rocks and was ultimately destroyed by a massive sea creature referred to as the Serpent of the Sea. Based on its location and behavior, this creature is most likely the monstrous Nevron seen from the cliff, only visible from that vantage point and absent from the overworld. It doesn't roam or engage like others. Instead, it looms. And given its sheer size, it looks more than capable of tearing down massive structures with ease. Then came a return to high-tech thinking. Expedition 43 traveled in submarines, navigating beneath the surface in hopes of avoiding detection. It seemed like a solid plan, at least until the Serpent Fair appeared, which is a giant flying serpent located high above the ground. Despite its elevation, it was able to locate the subs and destroyed them in minutes. This implies the Nevrons were able to track the expeditioners through their chroma, not their physical location. However, according to the journal, Lumiere's defense and engineering departments had to nearly bankrupt themselves to build those subs, only for them to be destroyed in under a minute. That failure didn't just cost resources, it accelerated the city's long-term technological decline. Expedition 40 had a similar idea but took to the skies instead of the sea. Aircrafts were deemed too loud and resource-heavy, so they relied on gliders, silent, elegant, and low-tech. It worked. They made it all the way to the monolith. But the moment they tried to glide past it, they were gommaged instantly. The journal's tone shifts from triumph to horror. Since Expedition 40 was clearly unaware of the barrier's existence, it also implies this information had not made it back to Lumiere. In stark contrast, Expedition 49 tried a more grounded, healing-focused strategy. Instead of relying on firepower, like aircraft, explosives, or wheels, they relied on water, which they used as a form of restorative energy. It worked, until it didn't. They eventually ran out of water, and even if they had more, their focus on defense made progress impossible. It's hard to ignore another connection to 49's fate. That same region, already soaked in tragedy, is where the Lady of the Sap appears, a towering creature made of sap and grief. Given that Clair repainted her duplicate to create Nevrons designed specifically to trap chroma, it's entirely possible the lady isn't a coincidence at all. She may be a byproduct of Clair's Nevrons, formed from the accumulated chroma of countless fallen expeditioners, a living monument to everything that was lost there and everything Clair hoped to reclaim. Expedition 52's journal proves that not all encounters with the Gestrals were helpful, but some were hilariously chaotic. One entry recounts how a Gestral broke an expeditioner's skull during what was supposed to be a friendly fight. Instead of providing medical treatment, the Gestral medic ignored the injury entirely and launched into a long rant about his own bone problems. But strange ideas weren't limited to the Gestrals. Further back in the timeline, Expedition 47 also tried something unconventional. They took a more experimental approach and earned the name the Drunken Brigade. Their strategy was to keep themselves slightly intoxicated, just enough to calm their nerves without dulling their instincts. Surprisingly, it worked, for a time. They managed to cover half the distance before their strategy fell apart. Some expeditions, however, fared even worse with their crazy ideas. Expedition 44 attempted something so strange it almost surpassed the wheel experiment. They killed a Nevron and wore its carcass as a disguise, hoping to sneak past the others. It failed instantly. The Nevrons weren't designed to recognize threats by appearance, but by chroma. As beings created to hunt and trap chroma, visual camouflage was meaningless. The team's plan didn't just fail, it also reinforced a key point about how Nevrons function. Then there's Expedition 42, whose journal offers almost nothing, except for a cryptic suggestion that Painted Renoir may have interfered, eliminating the group entirely. Expedition 45 found themselves deep within a cavern, where they encountered one of the more unique Nevrons documented so far. This one didn't kill with speed or stealth, it crushed its victims. The encounter can be described as a piston-like stone structure that traps its prey as soon as they enter the cavern. If players explore this area in-game, they can actually experience this boss encounter with a built-in time limit. Each turn brings the crushing mechanism closer, and failing to defeat the Nevron in time results in a literal crushing defeat. It's a terrifying and claustrophobic encounter that mirrors the haunting tone of the journal. In contrast, just a few years earlier, Expedition 41 offered a glimpse of progress. Pictos were mentioned again, but this time they had been combined with weapons. The integration, however, was experimental and unstable, and ultimately failed. It was an early attempt at weaponizing chroma-based tech, something that will play a much larger role later in the timeline. Then, in one of the game's more surprising finds, a journal belonging to Expedition 37 can be found inside the Gestural Beach, one of those fun mini-challenges you can do to earn unique rewards. The journal tells the story of a lone survivor who abandoned her team after they refused to listen to her advice, decisions that led them all to their deaths. She writes that a white-haired man was responsible for killing her teammates, almost certainly Painted Renoir. Instead of continuing the mission, she chooses to complete the Gestural Challenge. She claims it's harder than defeating the Paintress. Expedition 36's journal is filled with melancholic poetry, a quiet reflection of fading hope. But Expedition 35 shifts the tone back toward legacy and purpose. Their journal explains the origin of a bridge located in the Falling Leaves region, a structure not built with tools but with sacrifice. Knowing they wouldn't survive, the expeditioners laid down their lives to form a crossing for those who would follow. The bridge stands as both a literal path and a symbolic one, a gesture of hope etched into the landscape, and the living embodiment of their guiding motto, for those who come after. And when tomorrow came, it brought with it the breakthrough they had hoped for. By Expedition 34, Lumiere's understanding of Pictos had evolved dramatically. They were no longer being paired with music or used purely as symbols. Now they were linked to elements, marking the first recorded use of elemental damage in combat. The Expeditioner mentions that even with this advancement, something is still missing.
Maybe Gustav's idea to convert chroma from Pictos to... what did he call it? Lumina. Maybe that's not so crazy after all.
And that's the story these journals told, of hope and horror, of sacrifice and betrayal, all etched into the fractured world of Lumiere. Each flag, each fallen traveler, and every painted soul carries a piece of that history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Clair Obscur's expeditions, be sure to like, subscribe, and join me next time as we uncover some more secrets.